My name's Robin Percival, if you don't know it already, and I'm a member of the Bloody Sunday Trust and the Museum of Free Derry. And today or tonight we're creating a little bit of history because this is the first time we've done a live Zoom presentation. It certainly won't be the last, but bear in mind it is the first, so we're all a bit sort of slightly apprehensive in case we press the wrong button and all of that kind of thing, but hopefully it will go well. This is part of the annual Bloody Sunday commemoration, the 49th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday massacre in Derry on January 1972. And this is one of the, as I say, the first live event. I'm not going to go through the whole program because there's quite a lot of things, some of which are like this live Zoom event, some of which are pre-recorded, and some of which are sort of events which are sort of more maybe religious and in character and spiritual in character. I'm going to draw attention to you to two events which are coming up on Saturday, which are live events, and which, if you're free on Saturday morning, it would be good for you to come to. The first one is at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it's led by a guy called Pav Singh, who wrote this book, 1984, India's Guilty Secret. He'll be talking about the massacre of Sikhs in New Delhi and elsewhere in India in 1984, following the assassination of Indira Gandhi. And then at 1 o'clock, we have Conor Costick, Dublin-based historian, former editor of the Socialist Workers paper, who's going to talk to us about the Connaught Mutiny, Connaught Rangers Mutiny, which took place in 1920 and was, as it happens, in India and in the Punjab. So there is actually a bit of a connection to the two events. If you want the full program, could I suggest you go to the Facebook page of the Museum of Free Derry or the Bloody Sunday Trust, or both, and there is there an outline of the full program of events that continue tomorrow and on Saturday and on Sunday. And I hope you can all come to as many of them as you can. One other event I will mention, actually, which is on Sunday the 31st. That's an online, called On the Line. It's pre-recorded, but it's the very first of a series of events that the museum and the Bloody Sunday Trust are doing to commemorate, if that's the right word, partition in 1921. We're asking a broad range of people from different political and religious backgrounds to give their views on partition and their views on where we go from partition here in 1921, whether we go towards a united Ireland or not. There'll be, as I say, a wide range of voices, but the first one is this Sunday at 7 o'clock, and it's Paul McFadden will be interviewing Terry Wright, who's a local unionist, well known to Derry people, if not elsewhere. He was the vice chairman of the Ulster Unionist Party. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'm going to hand over now to Aoife Moore, who is the political correspondent of the Irish Examiner. She's a local lass, as we would say, and her uncle was one of those that was murdered on Bloody Sunday, Paddy Doherty, and she's going to lead the conversation with Ian Cobain about his book, Anatomy of a Killing. Aoife's claim to fame, as I'm sure many of you know, is that she was the journalist that broke the Golfgate story. And for those of you who don't know what Golfgate is, I'm not going to explain it all, but let's put it this way. It was a scandal that rocked the government and led to the resignation of a European commissioner. If you want to know more, then just Google Golfgate. Okay, Aoife, over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was slightly embarrassing, if not very nice and complimentary. Yeah, I just want to say thanks at the outset for the Museum of Free Dairy for organising everything and asking me. I've always been part of different things as a child, being one of the relatives, but it's nice to be asked as a grown-up now in my professional capacity to be involved in stuff. So I just want to say thanks. And I just want to say thanks to Ian for being here, even though we can't be here in person. So I thought better to just start at the start for people who don't know you, Ian, and don't know your background. Obviously, people like me will have heard of you. But do you want to just give a wee bit of background about yourself, kind of your history in writing and journalism and how you got to this book?
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much for having me, for inviting me. It is an honour. It's a great pity I can't be there. I love Derry. I've always enjoyed my visits to Derry. I think it's a tremendous city, but it's clearly not possible at the moment. But it is, as I say, an honour to be asked. So I'm basically a journalist who's more recently turned his hand a little to writing contemporary history, I guess. I've been a journalist all my adult life, all my working life, almost 40 years now. I've worked in a number of, I basically worked in local newspapers, and then went to work in what we call Fleet Street. And I guess as far as my work is concerned, there's been most definitely a before 9/11 period and an after 9/11 period. After 9/11, I found myself reporting on conflict an awful lot. I'd done a little bit of war reporting before 9/11, but I found myself doing an awful lot after 9/11. And then I found myself really eager to find out more about Western responses to Al-Qaeda's threat and American responses and British responses. And it was challenging work because a lot of those responses were hidden because they involved state crimes. They involved really serious crimes. The British tended to be more adept at hiding what they were doing than the Americans, who could be quite boastful at times. But the British were very good at covering up, concealment. And that work led me to work on my first book, which is kind of a history of British human rights abuses since 1940 through to, I know when it was published in 2012. And really it was as much about concealment, acts of concealment, as it was about the abuses, and as I say, the skilled way in which these matters are hidden away, hidden from public view, hidden sometimes through the failings of journalism, poor journalism. So, and I then decided I'd look at. There's a couple of chapters in there about Ireland, of course, about the north of Ireland, because if you're going to try and join the dots between what we were doing during the Second World War and what we were doing in during the retreat from empire in places like Aden and Kenya and Cyprus, then clearly at some point you end up just down the road from where you are now at Ballykelly Airfield, where there was a purpose-built interrogation centre constructed, and where the hooded men were taken in August of 71 and again in October of 71. And when that was declared unlawful, of course, the army, the British Army, tended to hand over to the police. And I managed to find and identify and persuade a number of people who were police officers who'd served at the so-called holding centres. It's an amazing euphemism, that, isn't it? The holding centres. Who talked quite candidly about what they did and how they did it and why they were doing it. And so there we are. And that first book was followed by another one, which looked more broadly, really, at these acts of concealment and the way in which official secrecy, it looks at the history of official secrecy in Britain and the way in which official secrecy works, not only to limit what we know about what's happening around us and in our name today, but also limits and I guess slightly distorts our understanding of what's happened in the recent past.
And you said, you know, you'd covered other conflicts before. Just in a general sense, how do you think Northern Ireland was different, or why do you, or even was it different from the other conflicts that you had covered before that?
Well, I didn't spend an awful lot of time in the north before. I did spend some time in there before, say, the Good Friday Agreement. I know the conflict didn't end with the Good Friday Agreement, but I spent some time there. It was a lot less dangerous for journalists than places like Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, a lot less dangerous, and Bosnia, which was and Croatia, which was an incredibly dangerous place to be. So, and of course, it was all kind of familiar. It's a familiar place. You know, you'd be surrounded by street furniture that looked the same. There'd be Marks and Spencer's around the corner. Everything, you know, common language, and you know, so it was conflict in familiar terrain amongst familiar people, and yeah, it was very different. It was very different, and of course, it's so close. You know, it's just a short hop on an airplane. Whereas getting in and out of a place like Afghanistan can take, well, getting out is quite easy. You can get out in a couple of days, but it can take weeks to get into some of these places, you know, weeks, and a lot of money.
And did you purposely go into the kind of security correspondence? Do you think your personality lent itself to that, or was it something that happened by accident after 9/11?
Well, at the time of 9/11, I was the chief reporter of the Times. I'd been hired as chief reporter, and I didn't have a clue what the title meant. I had no idea. I was just attracted by the idea of the title and a bit more money than I was earning. And it was only after 9/11 I thought, oh, well, I know what it means now. It means when everybody else is taking one step back because they don't want to get involved in reporting on these conflicts, I can't. I have to actually at least stand where I am and be picked to be sent to these places. So that is what happened then. Then trying to investigate rendition and detainee mistreatment, or kidnap and torture, as we actually call it in English. That was just me being curious, really, and seeing hints of what was going on, and wanting to know more, and being left really quite bemused by the blanket denials that I'd hear. Oh no, we don't do that sort of thing. Well, actually, I've just seen some evidence that you do, so I'm going to go and find some more evidence. The denial was the official denial was inspiring. Every time an official, a minister, somebody would say, "It's not true, we don't do this," I found myself thinking, "Oh yeah, I'm going to go and find a bit more evidence then." I first heard of it happening in Kabul, and I can't remember if it was late 2001 or early 2002, but it was very early, very early. Somebody who shall remain unidentified, but who's in a position to know, said, the Americans torturing people at Kandahar. They are. So, so it was quite early, but of course, it was such an incendiary allegation. It took me a while to find the evidence to stand it up.
And sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go on. But I do think very occasionally I'm asked to go and talk to students of journalism, and they ask me about investigative work, and I say, well, look, you know, I do all sorts of work. I don't just do investigation, but I try and make the point that investigative journalism is, as much as anything else, a state of mind. It's a state of curiosity and a state of not believing what you're told necessarily. And there's too many journalists who just, they hear something is served, something's presented to them, and they just think, oh, that's a lie. That'll feed the beast. I'll write that one up and keep the boss happy for a few days. And it's not really good enough. But there's an awful lot of it around, as you know. Maybe you were told that Golfgate didn't happen, you know? No, there was only 2 people in the room.
Yeah, I got a lot of lies the day of Golfgate. It was when they started lying to me that I realised I was onto something, actually. When the rooms started shifting and becoming 2 different rooms and then 3 different rooms, that's when I knew that
Right.
I was onto something. So yeah, definitely agree. I think the reason I get into journalism is because I mostly don't believe anything politicians say. And I think that's probably stands to me. But we'll move on now to the book anyway. And just wanted to say, for anyone who hasn't read it, who's tuned in, it's an absolutely amazing book. I loved it. I think I read it in 2 days. The reporting in it, everything is, the level of detail is unbelievable. So I'll stop the compliments now. But what struck me first was this was the 2017 killing during the Troubles. Why did you pick this specific murder, in 1978 of an RUC officer in Lisburn by the Provisional IRA? It was, by anybody's standards, would have been, might quite glibly have been called a kind of run-of-the-mill thing for the time. And although where it happened was probably the standout, you know, it happened in Lisburn. But why did you pick this particular killing to focus the book on?
Well, in truth, I could have probably picked any of them, and you could. I decided that I love microhistories. I've long been an admirer of microhistories. I think the idea of taking one relatively small event and picking it apart in an attempt to try and explain more about a much broader picture can be a very useful way of storytelling and of recounting history. It kind of works very often. I thought that it would be interesting to attempt a microhistory of the Troubles. It could probably have been almost any of these, you know, how many, 3,600, 3,700 killings or deaths, and you could actually do that with any of them. I thought what was interesting and kind of useful about this one was because I wanted to explore the stories of people who became involved in political violence, who would not have been most probably involved in any sort of violence, political or otherwise, had it not been for the circumstances through which they found themselves living, had it not been for the wider forces spinning all around them. And I also wanted to explore and possibly overturn some stereotypes about the IRA, and this particular killing was of interest because, of course, the man convicted of the killing, the man who carried out the killing, was a Protestant. He was a working class Protestant in his early 30s, and that would surprise a lot of people, I would think. And that in itself was interesting because it meant that I was in a position where, once I approached this, my question to him had to be, well, why? Why? Why did you join the IRA? Why did you do that? Why did you do that? And indeed, the whole time I was working on the book, and I worked on it on and off, I kept putting it away and abandoning it. And the whole time I worked on it, at the back of my mind, it was almost like a working subtitle for the book was, why did you do that? And so that's what I wanted to understand myself. I wanted to reach a greater understanding of what happened in the north of Ireland for all those years. And I wanted to figure out whether I could package my understanding into something that would be useful to the reader and would help the reader to understand. And although the book's been quite well noticed and received in Ireland, much of the time I had a vague idea of the reader in Britain in mind. And halfway through it, I realised that actually this is kind of a trilogy, these books. The first book was, the underlying message was, we British are not quite who we think we are. You know, we tell ourselves myths about ourselves. I know those myths don't travel very far. You know, you haven't got to go very far. You haven't got to go to Bengal before people start laughing at the idea that the British are all decent, law-abiding individuals. You've only got to go to West Belfast before you find people laughing at that idea, I know. But that's what British people tell themselves. The second book was a wider exploration of why it is that we don't have a perfect understanding of ourselves and our recent past. And the third book essentially was to say, as I say, had a British reader in mind, and I wanted to say, actually, our enemy, we British people's enemy, the IRA, they weren't who we think they were either. Actually, they were a little bit like us. So that was the idea, and that's what I realised I was exploring when I found myself working through the book. So in a sense, there is, I mean, it's not really a trilogy, but there is a common theme there. We are not who we think we are, we British. There are reasons why we're not, why we aren't quite who we think we are. When it comes to Northern Ireland, the people we regard as our enemy, they weren't quite who we thought they were either.
Mm-hmm. And how does one go about starting a book like this? Like, after you had decided on this murder, did you go to Lisburn? Did you contact the family? How do you even start? Because you covered every single detail, like from the weather on the day to what was on in the cinema. How do you go about starting something like that?
Okay, so I interviewed people involved, and I went to locations that were significant and visited them and made notes. I went to spend quite a bit of time in Lisbon, and which I think is a fascinating town, a city as it is now, and investigated the history of Lisbon in 1920 and the riots that followed the killing of District Inspector Swansea, and the way in which that kind of changed the demographic and had also had an impact on the demographics of West Belfast. Mm-hmm. So I did all that. I read newspapers accounts from the time. I had a kind of stroke of luck in that somebody tried to put an obstacle in my path, and it worked to my advantage, which is that I read in the Belfast Telegraph that the judge who jailed 3 men for their roles in this killing spent 2 hours reading out his judgment. He was a diplomat judge. He was no jury. He was delivering his judgment. He spent 2 hours. So I asked the court service for Northern Ireland for a copy of his judgments, and they didn't want to give it to me. I said, well, hang on, look, it's been read out in open court. It's very much a public document. And they said, okay, well, we'll see if we can find it. And they did find it, but instead of giving it to me, they said, oh, well, we found it, but we can't give it to you now. And I said, why not? And I said, well, we've given it to the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. So I contacted the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, and they said, oh, well, you're going to have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request. So I submitted my FOI request. Mm-hmm. And they said, right, well, I'm afraid that conflict related requests are taking a very long time to process. And I said, what, like months? And they said, no, years. And I said, oh, so you've put in place a process that takes years. Yep, takes years. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but the Act gives you 20 working days. Yeah. And another 20 working days to consider the competing interests between disclosure and retention. So you've put in place a process that subverts the Act. So I'm going to complain to the Information Commission about your failure to give it to me. And then I'm going to suggest to the Information Commission I might want to look at the lawfulness of the process that you put in place. And if necessary, I'm going to go to court to challenge the lawfulness of what the process you put in place. At which point they said, oh, would you like to submit a new request? So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I had a copy of the judgment then within a few days. And then they said, that's just part of the file. Would you like the rest of the court file? And I said, yeah, okay. And they said, well, that might take a little while longer because we've got to redact it for health and safety purposes. And I said, yeah, you take all the time you want, but I want it. And basically they were buying me off, and I allowed them to be bought off. So that's one of the things. But I worked on it on and off for years. There was an awful lot of time spent visiting sites, talking to people, reading. An awful lot's been written, of course, about the Troubles, and I set out to read as much as I possibly could. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's more or less how I worked on it.
And were you surprised at how forthcoming people who were involved at the time were willing to tell you, like, how forthcoming they were with their information? Is that quite common when you're kind of looking into the Troubles in Northern Ireland? Do you find that people are willing to share their experience?
More so than they would have been a few years ago, absolutely. A lot more so than a few years ago, although there's a great deal about which people don't talk, of course. And I don't know what that is. But who was it? Who was that American politician who talked about known unknowns and unknown unknowns? It's quite a useful expression. I'm aware that there's an awful lot of known unknowns about the Troubles. There's a lot about the story that I won't know about. I would imagine. So, but yes, people are quite, a lot of people are quite talkative. I guess they went through an awful cataclysmic period, and maybe a lot of people want to get it off their chests. Maybe, you know, they do want to talk about it. There's an awful lot to say about it. I know there's lots of people who say, no, let's just put it, it's past, let's put it behind us and move on. But there's a great many people who don't.
Yeah, and I don't actually know how much can be gained from just saying, oh, we'll just get over it and we'll put it behind us. Because I feel like even at my age, like I'm still in my 20s, and you can tell that there's still a lot of trauma that's carried around, and there are still, you know, inquiries that are still open. You know, when you look at the likes of Ballymurphy and the Finucanes, like they say, oh, you need to just get over the Northern Ireland conflict, but then there are families who have been left and they still don't have any answers. So it's all well and good to say, oh, you should forget about it, when it's still very much a part of people's lives. It's still very much present for some people, and just because I think it's easier for some people, it makes people uncomfortable. I live in Dublin, and I notice there is a serious amount of discomfort from polite society at times when you talk about the troubles. They'd rather that you didn't talk about it. And I don't know what there is to be gained from it, but I do find that a lot of people would just quite like it to end now, to stop the conversation, but I don't know how much there is to be gained from that.
Well, over here, there are people who know nothing about it at all, nothing. And if you consider that people who were at primary school at the time the Good Friday Agreement was signed are now in their 30s, and a lot of them don't know it very much at all. And that kind of ignorance is, I think it's dangerous, actually. I think, and you can see that the ignorance played out during the Brexit, before the European referendum, the Brexit campaign. We had a Northern Ireland secretary who was campaigning for Brexit as a politician, a Tory politician from the southeast of England. And at no point was she looking over her shoulder and thinking, what about the border? How does that work? You know? I mean, this is quite dangerous stuff, you know. Yeah. So I do think that I think people in Britain, I think it should be in the history curriculum. There should be compulsory teaching of the Troubles in schools across Britain. I really do. So there we are.
Yeah, it's not just an English thing. I mean, I lived in Scotland for years, but I've also lived in Dublin now for a few years, and I'm often taken aback, especially by people who live in the Republic. You know, some people are 90 miles from Dublin and it's a completely different world. Some people just genuinely have no idea because they're not taught it in certain history classes in their schools either. I think they're doing a bit better now, but definitely for people the same age as me, they had to go by themselves and kind of seek out this history and kind of research it themselves because it just wasn't taught in the Republic. And I think you're completely right when you talk about Brexit. Like, one of my best mates is from Yorkshire, and she was totally taken aback when she came to Derry, and was totally taken aback during the Euros when she found out that people didn't like English people. And she was more, she couldn't believe it. She was like, I thought everyone loved us. I thought we were these like great friendly people, and like my partner's Scottish, and even he was trying to explain to her like, nah, like your history is probably not doing you many favors here, like God love her. But and then that kind of brings me on to my next question. The book, you said you'd kind of thought of it when you're writing the book for an English audience. And what I noticed the most about it was there is so much context, and I think context in Northern Ireland is incredibly important. You know, someone doesn't wake up in the morning and decide to join the IRA just that morning, or someone doesn't get up in the morning and check under his car for a bomb and then decide to go to work for the UDR and think it's a great job. You know, factors in your environment create this life that people choose. And I think, like, in the book, you can tell, you know, someone's family history. There's even parts of when you're talking in the book about how many people were on the dole at the time, what the housing situation was, you know, how much money people had in their pockets. All those factors really affected people. And like, I think especially when people talk about the Troubles who didn't live through the Troubles, a lot is lost because there's no context given. So it's really easy to say, I would never do that, or isn't that awful, and I would never have done this if I was in that situation. But it takes away all the context that's needed for a proper grown-up mature debate about the Troubles and what happened. So when you were putting the context into the book, was that so English people would understand it a bit better, or is it just naturally your way of doing it?
No, the book context was incredibly important to me. The book, without the greatest possible context, I felt there was no point in me even attempting to write the book. I wanted to be fair to everybody involved. I wanted to be honest, completely honest, and open-minded and respectful even. And I wanted to have as much context. I wanted to unpick this one killing and place it in as wide a possible historical, political, economic, security context. And as you know, there's even there's a cultural and geographic context within the book. That's what I wanted to do. And there was a point in which somebody at the publisher's grantor was suggesting that maybe I might want to consider a little bit less context, having read an early manuscript. I said, no way. If I'm not going to have as much context as possible, I don't want to write the book. That's the whole purpose of it. And I think they thought, well, a little bit less context and a little bit more killing, and they wouldn't use that. They wouldn't have used such a crude expression, but maybe they're thinking it would be a better read. It would be a better book. It wouldn't. So the context was everything. That was the whole idea of the book, really, to try and take one killing like this and put it in as wide a possible context, and hope that you could try and reach a better understanding of what happened, really.
And were you surprised by anything when you were writing the book? Did you come away feeling that you had learned something new about Northern Ireland? You'd said you'd spent some time there before the Good Friday Agreement. So did you think that, was there anything that surprised you when you finished it or when you were doing the book?
There was no one thing that leapt out and you know, sort of grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and gave me a shake, but there was quite a lot. I was just struck by how ordinary everybody was and how people were just trying to respond to the events around them as best they could. And before the killing, there was an attempted killing of another police officer, and I interviewed him, and he's just very very reasonable now, and very understanding of what happened and why he was targeted in that way. There's no hatred in him at all. He can see that there were all sorts of problems in society, and that the police force of which he was a part of the problem, and he could see all that very clearly. And a man called Brian McKee, who's not so well now, and so yeah, there was no. I was struck by how thoughtful people were, and how candid people were when they were talking to me. They weren't just being truthful. They wanted to be candid. They wanted to tell me as much of their truth as they could. So that's that struck me. But there was nothing that let. Oh. Yeah, there was something that really struck me. The degree to which the army and the police got involved in town planning, and town planning, and the way in which motorways were being constructed as physical barriers between communities, as much as moving traffic around, and the way in which the army basically dictated some of the designs for the Polegrass estate. You know, how many roads in, how many roads out. Foundations underneath the pavement so it could withstand the weight of heavy armoured vehicles. You know, some of that I thought was, and the way in which the army and the police were interfering or playing a role in the allocation of housing, right down to individual houses on some roads. That was, and the Royal Marines designing children's playgrounds.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That was interesting. But much of it, that was a surprise. But for the most part, I would say it was territory that I felt I was slightly familiar with and understood. And I was just very struck, as I say, by how thoughtful a lot of the people I spoke to are and were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even through my own work, I find, you know, when you interview people who have been the most profoundly affected, I mean, if you speak to, say, like the parents of some of the people who died in the Oma bomb, or, you know, you interview Stephen Travers, who survived the Miami show band massacre, and they're incredibly thoughtful. There's no kind of hatred or bitterness. It's a real kind of thoughtful is the only word I can think at the minute, but they muse on it quite a lot, and they're very sort of contented in their own kind of history and the history of Northern Ireland, and it's never much this happened because of this one thing. Everyone seems, these people or survivors or victims or whatever they call themselves, seem very aware that there was a litany of factors that had to happen at this one particular time because so this thing could happen to them. And I think, yeah, that comes down to, you know, accepting the context of the time and the place and where things happened. And yeah, as I said, I think a lot of that is removed when it comes to reporting of the Troubles now. But I just wanted to ask now, like we were sort of talking about the book, and you'd said obviously you're English and you had thought of it as an English accent and an English audience. How do you think, how have English audiences taken to the book?
How have they taken it? Well, the reviews have been good. The reviews.
Well, that's good. That's the main thing.
Well, the reviews have been very good. The people I've spoken to who've read it appreciate it. A lot of them are saying they're pressing it on other people. I sort of worried a great deal about this book. In fact, I kind of stewed in it for a very long time. And one of the things, there was about three things principally that I worried about. And one of them was quite simply that, hey, I'm an Englishman writing about Ireland. You know, what can possibly go wrong there? I discussed it with a friend who's an Irish journalist and author, and she said, "Oh, like Ian, anybody writing about Ireland, what could possibly go wrong?" You know, and Irish people I spoke to were very encouraging. They said, "No, your perspective is as valid as anybody else's. Write your book, write your book." And so I did. I'm also aware that it's an intrusive book. It intrudes in the lives of the family of the man who died, the lives of the people who were convicted of his killing, their families, and it intrudes in the lives of neighbours and friends. And I found myself thinking, do I have a right to do this? Now, as a journalist, you know that an awful lot of journalism is necessarily intrusive. A lot of contemporary history is intrusive, and particularly, I've been doing this job a long time now, and I've come to the conclusion, I've had plenty of time to think about where my responsibilities lie, and I've come to the conclusion that my first responsibility is always to the reader rather than to the subject of my writing, my journalism. That doesn't mean I don't have any responsibility to the subject. Of course I do, but I must consider the reader first. But when I was considering the degree of intrusion, I found myself thinking, is it justified? And I decided it would only be justified if it was a good book. And by a good book, I don't mean that it's, you know, it's beautifully written or anything like this. I just mean if it's a useful book which helps the reader to understand what happened and why. And I hope that I've succeeded in that. So certainly the reviewers seem to think I have. So that was the other thing I worried about. And then finally, of course, I knew that I wouldn't know the full story here. You know, there'd be stuff that would be hidden from me. But again, as a journalist, you know, that if you ever decided you weren't going to write anything until you knew absolutely everything about it, you'd never put pen to paper. Nothing would get written.
I still kick myself about things that came out after Gulfgate that I should have realised at the time, but in the days after, I think more things came out. But as you say, when you're under pressure and it has to be done, and you know you're not going to know everything, you have to just get it all out on the page. We're just talking about English audiences, and you obviously live in England, and you were talking kind of about what English people get wrong about themselves. What do you think that English people get wrong the most about Northern Ireland and the conflict here?
Well, there was a Northern Ireland secretary who told the journalists that she didn't realise that when she was became Northern Ireland secretary, that unionists don't tend to vote for nationalist parties, and nationalists don't tend to vote for unionist parties. And I quickly Googled it and I thought, you're in your late 40s. you were in your early 30s when, oh no, your early 20s when the IRA was blowing up the city of London. Did you never find yourself thinking to yourself, oh, I wonder what all that's about? And did you never want to go out and find out? So that sort of degree of ignorance is breathtaking. But if a Northern Ireland secretary can be appointed to the role and not understand basic matters such as that, then how much ignorance is there elsewhere? There is. I mean, as you know, and it's the same in the South. People just turned off after a while. They stopped reading about it. They stopped. They literally switched their TVs off or switched over, and deaths weren't being reported. There was a point at which deaths weren't being reported. If it was a British soldier, you might have a paragraph at the foot of a left-hand page somewhere, but some deaths just weren't reported. People's stories weren't being told. I remember being in a bar off Grafton Street in the 1980s and chatting to the guy who was standing next to me having a pint, and the subject of the Troubles came up, and he just said, Belfast. He just shrugged his shoulders. Belfast, Beirut, all the same to me. He just didn't want to know. And it was the same. It was the same in Britain by and large. It was the same in Britain, unless there was a bombing on what the British very tellingly call the mainland. There wouldn't be, people wouldn't pay too much attention. And I guess it's partly due to the grind. It's partly due to the nature of the journalism. And you've asked me, why this one killing, and it could have been one of many, because so many of the stories of these people who died that haven't been told. One review described the book as rescuing the policeman Miller McAllister from the abyss of history. And he's kind of right. There's people, a lot of them, it's just as if the ground opened up and they disappeared. It meant something to the families and their neighbours and their colleagues and obviously to the people who killed them, but it's as if they were. I'd quite like to see more of this being done, really, the stories being told of these people who died. I've done it with one person, I can't keep doing it, but I do think it'd be, Lost Lives is a fantastic book, isn't it? Fantastic and very important book. And necessarily each death is dealt with briefly, but there's scope there for an awful lot more storytelling about people's lives, I would have thought, about the lives of those who died.
Yeah, there's a book came out last year by a friend of mine, a colleague. She's at the Irish Times, Freya McClements. She done a book called Children of the Troubles, and she reported on every child that died in the Troubles, and each page is like a memoriam to their life, like a obituary. And I was taken aback even by that, as in the amount of children. And as you say, these are just figures and statistics and books for a lot of the time. A lot of people died, and we talk about the Troubles as this one unit and don't think about the individuals involved, not only the individuals involved who died, but those who killed them or the circumstances around how they died. And as you say, the abyss of history, there are so many people who just won't get their story told. And I think as well, when you were talking about the kind of ignorance in the South and in England, I've even found in the last year reporting on Brexit, people are incredibly bored by it. Trying to get Irish people to care about Brexit is incredibly hard, and I think a lot of it is because if it doesn't come to your front door, you don't really have to care about it. On our website, on the Irish Examiner, stories about Brexit are the bottom of the pile when it comes to clicks, and it's because it's hard to understand and it hasn't come to your door, so you're not going to read it in your spare time. And I think a lot of the troubles for people who live in England or who live in the Republic is, well, it doesn't really affect me, and they like to be safe in their ready formed opinion, and then that's the end of it. And that kind of brings me actually to my next question and my last question. We had the Sunday Times poll last Sunday past there, if people didn't see it, that there is now a majority of people in Northern Ireland who want to see a border poll in the next 5 years. They mightn't necessarily want a united Ireland, they want the border poll question at least out of the way so that they can move on from it. As someone who covered the Scottish independence referendum, I can guarantee that it is not going to go away, even if he's have a border poll. But what is your feeling about this notion of the end of the United Kingdom? You know, where Scotland has been agitating now for years to leave. Nicola Sturgeon would saw it off and push it into the sea if she thought she could. And, you know, the in-betweeners in Northern Ireland, these kind of neither nationalists nor unionist people, are going to be the people who decides the constitutional future of Ireland. What's the feeling in England? Is there any kind of, is there still that kind of passion for this United Kingdom, the colonialism, this rule Britannia? Like, we saw a bit of it during Brexit, but a lot of it during Brexit was they didn't even really care if Scotland and Northern Ireland left. They just wanted their own sovereignty, whatever that means to them.
Well, I think English exceptionalism is still alive and kicking. I think it can be. I think it's one of the reasons why we've got such a high death rate from COVID.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because people actually believed that, hey, you know, the Italians are suffering, but they're Italians. I believe that. I believe that.
So do I,
in fact,
I'll show you that there's proof of it, which is a speech that Boris Johnson gave in Greenwich in South East London on February the 3rd, the text of which is still on the government website, in which he said it. He said there's going to be one government in the world that's going to, get this, he said it's going to dive into the nearest phone box, like Clark Kent, discard its spectacles. Really, this is what he said in February the 3rd. This is after the World Health Organization had declared this a global emergency, and is going to come out with its cape flapping as a champion for free trade. It's still there, and that's English exceptionalism, and colliding or about to collide with the reality of a pandemic. And we can see so there's an awful lot of this about. But I had a conversation about this actually with a friend in Belfast just this morning about what whether now England and Britain, the United Kingdom kind of made sense as the centre of an empire, and England made sense as the centre of the United Kingdom. But when Scotland goes spinning off, and it will, then it seems to me more likely that Ireland will be reunited. I may be wrong, but that's entirely a possibility. And you find yourself thinking, well, what's the point of I suspect that Wales will go spinning off one day, but possibly not in my lifetime. But you know, I find yourself thinking, what's the point of England? What are we about then? Because there's not that much coherence within England. You know, I look at some of the places I know well, like Liverpool and Penzance. They've got nothing in common with each other at all, nothing at all. And so what will become of dear old England in those circumstances? I don't know. I don't know. Now, I know a lot of Irish nationalists will be shrugging their shoulders and thinking, well, we don't care, you know. But it's kind of worrying for me. And but Scotland will go. I mean, today, the government, as part of its strategy to deal with the possibility of another referendum and move towards independence, they sent Boris Johnson to Scotland. As you know, having lived there, Scottish people despise men like Boris Johnson. They think that they are the worst that England has to offer. They shouldn't have let him go anywhere near the place, frankly. So, and when Nicola Sturgeon was saying, oh, I don't think he should come, what she was obviously thinking was, great, send him up, send him up.
He's also
so,
if you say, I don't think he should come, he'll just turn up anyway. So she probably knew that as well.
Well, I think she probably wanted him to come. He's almost like the SNP secret weapon, isn't he? And part of the problem is the way that the UK government has dealt with the virus. It really is. So, but there we are. There we are. So I don't quite know what's going to happen with England. But as I say, the United Kingdom made sense. It had some sort of coherence as the centre of a large empire, and England makes sense as the centre of the United Kingdom as the ballast of the United Kingdom. But England on its own, it could be interesting.
Exciting.
And we English we do tell ourselves myths about ourselves, you know, but tell ourselves stories about our greatness. And, you know, it's just, we're a weird bunch, Aoife.